Picture a house. A narrow terraced house in a street of 30 identical narrow terraced houses. London, November 1884. The wallpaper in the front parlour is dark green with a small gold pattern that has faded over the years into something closer to mud. There's a horsehair sofa that scratches the back of your legs through your skirt. There's a fireplace with a marble surround that once suggested modest prosperity and now mostly collects dust. There's a mantel clock with a gilt case and Roman numerals, and a pendulum that swings with the kind of tireless mechanical precision that starts to feel genuinely cruel the moment the man lying on the sofa behind you stops breathing. The clock is still ticking. He is not. That's the thing nobody tells you about the moment someone dies. The world doesn't stop. The world absolutely does not stop. The street outside carries on. A cart going past, a dog barking somewhere, a child's voice saying something unintelligible and cheerful. The fire in the grate pops and settles. The clock swings its pendulum. Tick, tick, tick. Somewhere inside you something enormous and formless cracks open, and you stand there in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday afternoon feeling like the ground has been replaced with water and the clock just keeps going. He's been sick for 11 days. Typhoid, the doctor said, which meant hot compresses and careful nursing, and the specific kind of hope that knows it might be lying to you. Your mother has barely slept. You've barely slept. The youngest ones have been sent to your aunts in Holloway, which tells you something about what the adults privately believed, even while they were saying he'd pull through. Just, you wait. He's a fighter. He was a fighter. He lost. The clock says 2:30 in the afternoon on the 14th of November, 1884. You know the exact time because you've been watching it the way you watch something when you don't know what else to do with your eyes. 2:30 is the time your father left the world, and the clock is marking it, swing by swing, second by second, carrying you away from that moment and into a future you haven't thought about yet. I'm going to stop right there. Because that clock is about to become the first thing you do. We're going back tonight. Not to visit. Not to observe from a safe distance the way history usually works. We're going to live it. You are going to stop every clock in this house with your own hands. You're going to cover every mirror with black cloth until the rooms look like a theatre between performances. You're going to do it because you have to, because everyone you know expects you to, because failure to perform this ritual correctly will be noticed and remarked upon and remembered against you, possibly for years. And then, when you've done all of that, you're going to understand exactly why. So I make these history stories, and I genuinely have no idea if any of you actually sleep to them, or if you're all just people who find Victorian death customs oddly calming at 11 o'clock at night. Possible. Likely. Honestly. Get comfortable. Here we go. Your mother hasn't moved. She's standing beside the sofa. He died on the sofa. They'd moved him down from the bedroom when the stairs became too much. And she's holding his hand. She's been holding it for the last hour. Through the rattling breathing and the long silences between breaths, and then the last silence, which was different from the others in a way you can't quite name but recognised immediately. She's still holding it. Her face is doing something complicated that you don't know how to look at directly. You're 19. Your brother William is 22 and in Manchester and doesn't know yet. Your sisters Mary and Ellen are at your Aunt Frances's, and they don't know yet either. The only people who know right now are you and your mother and the doctor, who left 20 minutes ago with a face that told you everything before his words did, and Mrs. Hodgson from number 14. who was somehow already in the hallway when you opened the front door to let the doctor out, because Mrs. Hodgson knows things before they happen, or perhaps because the walls in these terraced houses transmit sound better than their landlords would like you to believe. Your father worked at a counting house in the city. He kept ledgers. He had ink-stained fingers and a habit of humming while he worked, and a very specific laugh that came from nowhere when something caught him off guard. Loud, sharp, gone as fast as it arrived. He made 35 shillings a week. That was enough. Not comfortable exactly, but enough. Enough for this house, for the children's school fees, for Sunday roast and the occasional small luxury and the general sensation that things were, broadly speaking, under control. 35 shillings a week. Gone. That thought is there, horrible and precise, sitting underneath the grief like a stone floor under carpet. You're ashamed to be thinking about money right now. But the thought is there anyway, because the house costs 12 shillings a month, and the coal costs more in winter, and there are 4 children including you, and 35 shillings is not going to be coming anymore, and you don't know yet what is. But that's not the first problem. The first problem is the clock. Mrs. Hodgson comes into the parlour. She's a stout woman in her 50s, iron grey hair scraped back under a cap, with the particular authority of someone who has done this before and knows what needs doing. She lost her own husband 12 years ago. She lost a son to scarlet fever the year before that. She navigates grief the way watermen navigate a fast current, not without feeling it, but knowing where the rocks are. "Mary," she says, and your mother looks up. Something in her face softens slightly at being called by her name, by someone who has known her for 15 years. "Come away now. Come sit with me." Your mother is led to the good chair by the window. Mrs. Hodgson gets the fire built up without being invited, moving through your kitchen with the casual competence of someone who has decided that the niceties of invitation do not apply tonight, and is absolutely right about this. There's the rasp of the poker, the shift of coals, and the warmth in the parlour increases by several degrees, which is both welcome and faintly strange because the man on the sofa is beyond needing warmth now, and making the room more comfortable for the living feels simultaneously necessary and obscene. "Now," Mrs. Hodgson says, coming back in, wiping her hands on her apron. She surveys the room with a calm, practised eye. It lands on the mantel clock. Has it been stopped? It hasn't. It's still ticking. 2:30 is now 2:30 and some indeterminate number of minutes, time having continued forward without asking anyone's permission, which is, you're beginning to understand exactly the problem. "No," you say, "then we'll do it now." She doesn't reach for the clock herself. She looks at you. This is yours to do. You understand that without explanation. You cross the room. The clock sits on the mantel between 2 china dogs your mother was given as a wedding present, and a photograph of your parents taken around 1865 before you were born, when they were both very young and stood stiffly before a painted backdrop looking simultaneously proud and terrified. The gilt case reflects the firelight. The glass face looks back at you. The pendulum swings, indifferent. There's a key, brass, small, kept on the ledge behind the right-hand china dog. You take it. You're not going to wind the clock. You're going to do the opposite of wind it. You're going to open the little door and still the pendulum with your finger, which you have never done before, and which feels like something you shouldn't be doing, like stopping a river with your hand, like telling the world to pause. You open the door. You reach in. Your fingertip touches the brass pendulum on its swing, pressing, holding. The mechanism resists you for just a moment. springs and weights wanting to keep going, doing the thing they were built to do. Then your finger holds firm. The tick becomes silence, absolute silence, the kind of silence you can hear. Your mother makes a sound, small, involuntary, immediately suppressed. The clock reads 2:31 on the 14th of November 1884. This is the moment. This is the time that will be written on the announcement card, on the funeral notice, on every piece of black-bordered paper that goes out over the next 2 days. The time things ended. The clock says so. The clock will continue to say so, hands unmoving, pendulum stilled. For the entire mourning period, sitting on this mantle marking not the time that is but the time that was. Now why? That's what this is really about. Not just what they did, though what the Victorians did with death is extraordinary, and we'll get to all of it. All the customs and the crape and the mourning clothes and the professional mourners and the extraordinary, overwhelming, expensive, suffocating apparatus of Victorian grief. But why? Because from a distance it's easy to see superstition, primitive habit, people clinging to customs they couldn't rationally justify. But you're not at a distance. You're standing at this mantle with a clock key in your hand and the silence ringing in your ears, and from where you're standing it makes a different kind of sense entirely. The clock stopped because time stopped. Not metaphorically. In this house, for this family, time has actually stopped. The future your father was going to be part of. The one where he came downstairs to breakfast and went to the counting house and came back with ink on his fingers and hummed that tuneless hum. That future doesn't exist anymore. Something enormous has ended. The stopped clock is the way of saying so, out loud, in the only language a clock has. Also, every clock in the house, every single one. Mrs. Hodgson is already moving toward the hallway, where there's a bracket clock on the shelf halfway up the stairs. You follow. The kitchen has a clock above the range. Your parents' bedroom has a small travel clock your father was given by his employers for 10 years' service. The back parlour has a clock that hasn't worked properly in 2 years but still has its hands. All of them. Every one. The bracket clock in the hallway stops with 2 small protesting clicks before settling into stillness. It reads 2:32. You took a minute to get there. You think briefly about adjusting it, making them all match, and then decide that this would somehow be worse. 2:31, 2:32. Each clock marking the moment it was stopped, the moment someone came to it with a key and said, "Here, time ends here." The kitchen clock. You reach up and still the pendulum. The range is still burning. The fire doesn't know what happened in the parlour any more than the clock did. And the heat is thick and dense. And there's a pot on the back of the range that your mother must have put on this morning before things became what they are now. Soup, maybe. Something that was going to be supper. It will go cold and probably be thrown away because who could eat supper tonight? And yet the fire burns on because the fire doesn't care. You stand in the kitchen for a moment. The copper pot. The familiar smell of coal and damp wool and the particular cold-warmth combination of a Victorian kitchen in November. Your hands are shaking slightly. Not grief, not yet. That's still somewhere behind a wall that you've apparently built without knowing you were building it, because there's too much to do. It's something else. Some deep register below grief, some physical knowledge of wrongness that your body has understood before your mind caught up. Mrs. Hodgson's hand on your arm. She can see it in your face. The calculations starting, the lists forming. the part of you that's already thinking telegram to William and fetch the children and the undertaker, and what does this cost and what comes next. She shakes her head. Not now. The clock first. Then the mirrors. There are 4 mirrors in the house. The large one in the parlour, gilt-framed, above the fireplace, that your mother has had since before she was married. The smaller one in the hallway, dark-framed, slightly spotted with age in the silver backing, that tells you what you look like when you go out. The one in your parents' bedroom, oval, mounted on the dressing table, surrounded by your mother's hairpins and her tortoise-shell combs, and the little dish where she keeps her rings when she's doing housework, and the hand mirror in your own room, bone handle, a Christmas present 3 years ago from your father, the one you used to check the back of your hair. Mrs. Hodgson sends you for black cloth. You know where it is. Your mother keeps a piece folded in the bottom of the linen chest, wrapped in brown paper. She put it there some years ago. It was just something that was there. The way certain things exist in houses without ever being spoken of. The piece of black cloth for when it was needed. You've seen it 100 times without thinking about what it was for. You think about it now. The cloth is about 4 yards. Heavy wool, a thick weave with a dull matte finish. Nothing glossy, nothing light-catching. It smells of camphor, packed in to keep the moths away, medicinal and chemical. Underneath that just fabric, just wool. Cold and dense in your hands. You carry it back downstairs. The parlour mirror first. It's large, 3 feet across, nearly 2 high, hanging on a hook above the fireplace, which means you need something to stand on. Mrs. Hodgson brings the wooden step your mother uses for the high kitchen shelves. You climb up. The mirror looks back at you. You look terrible. You knew this without looking. 11 days of difficult sleep and constant worry, and today above everything. But seeing it confirmed is something else. Shadows under your eyes that look like bruises, hair pulling loose from its pins on one side. Your face a colour that would, in other circumstances, cause someone to reach for smelling salts. You look like someone who has spent 11 days watching their father die. Which is obviously exactly what you are. The mirror is doing exactly what mirrors are supposed to do, and you cover it anyway. You fold the cloth over the top of the frame and let it fall. The mirror disappears beneath it. The reflection goes. The parlour becomes a degree darker, the black wool absorbing what the glass used to return. You climb down and stand back. The room is different now. The room knows something happened in it today. Why cover the mirrors? If you ask Mrs. Hodgson, she'll give you some version of what every woman on this street would tell you. The soul of the dead is still in the house, lingering for 3 days, for 7, until burial frees it, and it should not be confused by its own reflection. The spirit of the newly dead is disoriented, caught between here and wherever it's going, and a mirror shows it where it is, traps it in recognizing itself, delays the departure. Various versions of this, overlapping and held simultaneously without much concern for internal consistency. The way protective belief always works, not as a logical system but as a body of practice accumulated over generations, each layer adding its own justification until the original reason is buried under a century of explanations. There's another reason. You've just seen your own face in that mirror. You know what you look like right now. You know the grief is written all over you. Not cinematically, not with the single elegant tear of someone being beautiful in distress, but in the specific ugly way that real grief is real. Swollen around the eyes, tight around the jaw, the particular bleached pallor of someone holding themselves together through will alone. For the next days and weeks and months, And it will be months. We're going to talk about exactly how many months. People will be in and out of this house. Neighbours, relatives, members of the church. They will come to pay their respects, to offer condolences, to discharge their social obligations, and they will look at you and your mother, and you will look back at them, and all of it will be, whether you want it to be or not, a performance, a demonstration that you are grieving correctly, sufficiently, with the appropriate degree of visible devastation, and simultaneously the appropriate degree of composed dignity, which is a very fine line that Victorian mourning culture has drawn with great precision and expects you to walk without wobbling. You cannot do that while looking at your own face. The covered mirror can't report you. The hallway mirror. You fold the cloth, carry the step, climb up, drape. The hallway is narrow. These terraced houses were not built with generosity in mind, and with the cloth over the mirror it narrows further in the dark, the black swallowing the little light from the fanlight above the door. You come down and stand there for a moment, and the house feels like somewhere you've never been. The wrong house, someone else's house, a house keeping a secret. You've lived here your entire life. You know every floorboard that creaks. You know the smell of coal smoke and beeswax and your father's pipe tobacco that has lived in the walls for years. You know the exact sound the front door makes when it catches on the swollen wood in wet weather. This is your home. Now it's strange. Grief does this. It takes the place you know entirely and makes it new and wrong and slightly threatening, because the map in your head was made with someone in it who isn't there anymore, and the territory no longer matches the map. The dressing table mirror. Mrs. Hodgson comes with you to the bedroom. Your mother is still in the parlour. Mrs. Hodgson's daughter Gertie, a girl of 15, has been sent for to sit with her. The bedroom is cold. The fire in here hasn't been lit for a week and a half because your father hasn't been able to manage the stairs, and there was no point heating an empty room. The cold is sharp and still, the kind that accumulates in a shut room over days, and the smell is different here. Beeswax polish, the lavender sachets in the wardrobe, the ghost of your father's shaving soap that is somehow still faintly present, even though he hasn't been up here to use it for 11 days. The dressing table is your mother's territory. Everything on it precisely arranged in the way that says these things matter. The tortoiseshell combs, the small bottle of lavender water with its stopper, the pin dish, the tiny wedding photograph in a tortoiseshell frame. These are her little luxuries, this self-maintenance of a woman who has very little leisure and spends it here, at this mirror, for 20 minutes in the morning. The oval glass reflects the cold window, grey November sky, bare branches of the plane tree in the backyard. You drape the cloth over it. Your mother's things disappear beneath a fold of black. The bedroom is dimmer, the cold feels sharper. Your mother is going to need new mourning clothes. The thought is back, unwanted, precise. The funeral must be arranged, letters must be written. The undertaker, William by telegram because a letter takes too long, and time, stopped as it now is symbolically, continues to move in every practical sense, as it always does, without asking whether you're ready. But that comes later. That's all coming, in hours and days ahead, in a cascade of obligations and expenses and performances that'll last, for your mother, the better part of 2 years. For now, the last mirror, yours, it's in your room. Bone handle, oval glass, the one you got at Christmas 3 years ago from your father. From your father, who is now lying on the sofa downstairs with his hands folded and the pennies not yet on his eyes. You hold it for a moment before covering it. You turn it over. The back is plain white bone. Not your reflection, just an object. He gave it to you because you'd said casually once that the hallway mirror was too high for you to see yourself properly. He'd remembered, the way he remembered things you'd half forgotten saying, and wrapped it in tissue paper with a card that said so you can always see how fine you look. You set it face down on the dresser. You cover it with cloth. There. All 4 mirrors in the house covered. All the clocks stopped. The house is properly arranged for mourning. From outside, anyone who happened to glance up at the front room window, and they will be glancing, they are already glancing, because this is a terrace of 30 houses, and a death has happened here today, and nobody loses a husband on a Tuesday afternoon without the whole street knowing by Wednesday morning at the absolute latest. We'll see the draped cloth and understand. The house is signalling what has happened inside it. The house is doing what is required. You stand in your room for a moment after the mirrors are done. The silence up here is different from the parlour. The parlour has the quality of something immediate, still warm in its absence. Up here it's just a room, just the ordinary quiet of a cold November afternoon. The distant sounds of the street, a pigeon on the ledge outside the window, its small shifting weight audible through the glass. Your room has a hairbrush, a Bible, a school prize for geography from when you were 12 with your name written inside in the headmaster's copper plate, 3 novels from the lending library, a patchwork counterpane that your mother made before you were born, and which has been your counterpane your whole life. Normal. Yours. None of it has changed. Everything has changed. You go back downstairs. Mrs. Hodgson has sent Gertie home and sent instead for Mrs. Price from number 22, who has done laying out before and knows exactly what the next hours require. There's already a boy from the undertaker's at the door, young, acned, wearing a hat too large for him, delivering word that Mr. Goff will call tomorrow morning at 10. The undertaker is Goff and Son on the Marylebone Road, established 1861, premises you've walked past hundreds of times, the black painted frontage, the announcement cards in the window, the small display of coffin furniture, handles, decorative plates, the hardware of the dead. You think, telegram to William. You think, fetch Mary and Ellen from Aunt Frances's. You think, coal. Are we low on coal? Check if we're low on coal. Mrs. Hodgson is already sending you out, not for coal, for salt. This is the errand you get, the one that is simple and purposeful and requires movement and cold air, and the performance of a normal act in a world that has become entirely abnormal. A packet of salt from Mrs. Appleton's on the corner, 2p. It's cold outside, really cold, the November cold of London that doesn't bite so much as settle, a damp weight that gets into the back of your throat and behind your eyes. The cobblestones are slightly slick with a fine drizzle that's been falling at some point in the last hour without you noticing, because you've been inside with clock keys and black cloth. The street carries on, a woman walking past with a basket, a man coming out of the house 2 doors down, the distant sound of a horse and cart on the main road. Normal Tuesday afternoon, the world doing what it does. Mrs. Appleton is behind the counter, small, sharp-featured, bright eyes that miss nothing. She looks at you as you come through the door, really looks the way someone does when they already know something and are measuring how much you know that they know. And her expression shifts toward the particular combination of sympathy and avid attention. That is the characteristic register of neighbourhoods like this one receiving news like this. "Miss," she says, "a packet of salt, please." She gets it without another word. "I heard," she says, as you take the salt. "I'm very sorry for your trouble." "Thank you." The charred silence. She wants to know more. You don't have the energy to give it, and there is a specific wordless understanding between you that the correct thing for you to do is thank her and leave, and the correct thing for her to do is accept this, which she does. "You'll tell your mother anything she needs." "Yes, thank you." Outside again. The cold, the cobblestones, the little paper packet of salt in your hand, real and solid and weighing about 4 ounces, which is exactly what it should weigh. He is also real, but a different kind of real now. The salt. This is old. Older than any of the Victorian mourning customs, older than the formal regulations you'll hear about from the undertaker tomorrow morning, older than jet jewellery and mourning warehouses and professional mutes. A dish of salt placed near the body is one of those practices carried forward through so many generations and through so many layers of explanation. It purifies, it prevents swelling, it wards off whatever it is that needs warding off. It was what the grandmother did and her grandmother before her. That by 1884 people do it mostly because people do it, which is in many ways the most powerful reason of all. Convention is its own justification. The body of practice holds. Back in the house, Mrs. Price and Mrs. Hodgson are already at work in the parlour. The door is half closed. You can hear the low murmur of their voices, the sound of water, the small, careful movements of women who know what they're doing and are doing it without fuss and without drama. This is what the women in this street do. Not the undertaker, not tonight. The women. The neighbours and female relatives, experienced hands who've done this before, who know how to wash and dress and fold and arrange, who bring practical skill to the one event every family faces and for which nobody is really prepared. They'll wash him, dress him in his good Sunday shirt, the one in the press upstairs, second drawer from the top. You mentioned it to Mrs. Price before she went in. They'll fold his hands on his chest. They'll close his eyes with the pennies. They'll tie a length of bandage under his chin and around his head to keep the jaw from falling open, because dignity has very specific physical requirements in the hours after death. Requirements that the body no longer manages itself and that the living must manage for it. The salt will be set in a small dish nearby. Old practice, new old house, the same act. Your father will lie here until the coffin comes, on the sofa where he died, or on boards if Mrs. Hodgson thinks boards more suitable. She'll decide. This is what she does. He'll lie here until Friday, and people will come to view him, and you and your mother will stand at the parlour door and receive them. This is not strange. This is not morbid by the standards of this street, this city, this time. The viewing of the body is how community confirms a death and mourns it collectively. You cannot grieve from a distance in 1884. You must be present. You must stand in the room. You must look. It's getting dark outside. 4 o'clock in November, and the last of the grey light is going. The gas lamps on the main road not yet lit on this stretch. The street settling into the particular urban dusk that feels like the city drawing breath before the evening. Candles appearing in windows. The distant sound of horses. You sit in the back parlour, the small room behind the kitchen, the one used for everyday life rather than display, and you try to think about what you have to do. The list in your head is impossibly long. Telegram to William, fetch the children, write to Aunt Frances, to your mother's cousin in Hertfordshire, to the members of the church, draft the announcement for the newspaper, Meet with Mr. Goff tomorrow morning. Think about the funeral. Think about the grave. Think about where the money is coming from and what happens after and what life becomes now. Do not think about the man on the sofa in the front room. Do not think about the Christmas card he wrote, so you can always see how fine you look. Do not think about how fine you don't look right now, cannot look right now, because all the mirrors are covered and you cannot see yourself at all. There's something almost merciful about that. Just at this moment, just for tonight. You don't have to look. The clocks on the mantel and the shelf and the kitchen wall are all stopped. The mirrors are all covered. The house is sealed against time and reflection both, which is to say, it is sealed against the two ways you usually locate yourself in the world, where you are in the day and who you are in the room. Both of those are gone. You're in a house outside of ordinary time, a house in which the present moment is being held, extended, preserved, stretched, so that the enormity of what has happened can be accommodated rather than immediately run over by the next hour and the next day and all the days that follow. Victorian mourning customs make a kind of sense that is not the sense of science. They make the sense of the human animal, which needs ritual the way it needs warmth, which needs the outside world to correspond to the inside one, which needs its house to say, out loud, in a language everyone understands without being told, something has ended here. Something significant has been lost here. We're not pretending otherwise. We're not carrying on. We are stopping. We're covering the surfaces that reflect. We are stilling the mechanisms that mark the minutes. We are making space for what has happened. Physical space. Visible space. And we will keep making that space for as long as is required. As long as is required in 1884 turns out to be quite a long time. We'll get to that. Your mother comes into the back parlour at some point. You've lost track of the clock, obviously, and it takes you a moment to realise this and that it is strange and that it is intentional, and sits across from you at the small table. She still looks like someone who's been through a wall, which she has. But she's had tea and a small amount of brandy, and Mrs. Hodgson's particular brand of capable competence at close range, and she's not shaking anymore. She's just tired. The specific kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from exertion, but from holding something very heavy for a very long time, and then putting it down. William, she says. I'll go to the post office in the morning, you say. First thing, she nods. The girls, she says. Aunt Frances will bring them tomorrow, or I'll go. She nods again. Mr. Goff is coming at 10, you say. She knows. She heard the boy at the door. She nods a third time, and the nod means, I know what that meeting is. I know what it will cost and what it will ask of me and what I will have to decide, and I will be here for it, because there is nothing else to be. Mrs. Price appears in the doorway. We're finished, she says quietly. He looks very well. This is the thing that people say, and it's the kind of thing that should sound strange but doesn't, because what it means is we have cared for him properly and with dignity, and he looks like himself as much as is possible, and you can come in when you're ready. Your mother gets up. You follow. He does look well. That is the astonishing thing. The pallor is there, obviously, unavoidably. The particular stillness and pallor of a face no longer doing the unconscious, constant work of being alive. But Mrs. Price and Mrs. Hodgson have done their work carefully and with skill, and he's in his good shirt with the collar properly arranged, and his hands are folded across his chest, and his face is composed. He looks like himself at rest. He looks like himself. The dish of salt is on the table beside him. white, coarse, a plain earthenware dish. The fire in the grate is banked low. Enough warmth for the living, but not too much. The candle on the mantel is lit. The clock above it is stopped at 2:31. You stand at the foot of the sofa. Your mother kneels beside him and puts her hand over his folded hands and says something you don't hear, something quiet and private and entirely hers. You look at the clock. 2:31. It will say 2:31 until Friday, when he goes out the door for the last time and the house begins its long negotiation with the clock's restart. But you don't know that yet. You just know the hands are stopped and the pendulum is still and the room is very quiet and very cold and very full. You stay for a while. Then you go back to the back parlour and you begin making your list. The next morning comes as mornings do. Suddenly and too soon, the thin November light sliding under the curtains despite everything, birds doing what birds do regardless of what has happened in human houses, your body informing you that regardless of circumstances it requires at least some attention. You've slept perhaps 3 hours. Your neck is stiff because you slept in the chair rather than going up to bed. Your mouth tastes of cold tea and the particular sourness of exhaustion. Mrs. Hodgson is already here. You don't know when she left or when she returned. Possibly she didn't leave. The fire in the kitchen is going, the kettle on, a loaf on the table that someone has fetched from somewhere. This is the thing about grief in a community. For the first few days, people feed you. Neighbours appear with loaves and pots of soup and cold bacon, and small, specific acts of practical kindness that require nothing from you except a thank you at the door. It doesn't last. It can't. People have their own households, their own fires to manage. But while it lasts, it's a genuine mercy, because the part of your brain that would normally organise the daily domestic logistics has gone temporarily offline, and someone else needs to be doing it. William arrives Thursday morning by the first fast train from Manchester, which gets him to Euston at 7:30 in the morning, so he's at your door before 9. He looks knocked sideways. This is the only way to describe it. He's your father's son in the face, which is difficult to see right now. The same jaw, the same set around the eyes, and he's been 2 days on the train and in lodgings with this knowledge and no one to talk to about it. And he comes through the door and your mother sees him, and something in her face collapses and rebuilds in about 3 seconds flat. Because she still has children to hold together even now. They hold each other in the hallway for a long time. You stand slightly to one side and look at the space where the hallway mirror used to be, and it's strange. You keep reaching for it with your eyes, looking for your own face in the dark framed glass and finding black cloth instead. This happens repeatedly over the following days. Some deep habitual reflex in the visual system seeking the reflection, and the reflection not being there. It's slightly disorienting, like a missed step on the stairs. Shouldn't bother you. You covered that mirror yourself with your own hands. It bothers you a little. Not badly. Just a small repeated wrongness that keeps tapping you on the shoulder. The clocks bother you too, more than you expected. You catch yourself looking at the stopped mantel clock and calculating based on the quality of the light. Mid-morning, maybe 10. Yes, that would be right. And not being certain, because the clock tells you 2:31 and only 2:31, and the light is your only guide now. The light and the church bells from St. James's, which ring every quarter hour and have been the timekeepers of this neighbourhood for longer than the neighbourhood has existed. There's something in that, something worth noticing. The clock stopped because time stopped, but time hasn't actually stopped, and the church bells are proof. They ring on regardless. The street moves on regardless, and you are learning to navigate without your usual tools. Without the mirror that tells you who you are and the clock that tells you where you are in the day, and what you discover underneath the disorientation, underneath the repeatedly missed step of looking for your reflection, is that you can do it. You can navigate by light and by bells and by the knowledge that sits in your body even when the instruments are taken away, which is perhaps something about grief itself, about surviving it, about the way it disorients and removes and leaves you standing in a strange house in which all the usual reference points are covered or stopped, and you find out that you can still find your way. But that understanding is weeks away. Right now it's Thursday morning, and William is here, and the funeral is tomorrow, and Mr. Goff arrived yesterday at 10 o'clock with his little leather notebook, and this is what that meeting was like. Mr. Goff is punctual. Undertakers in London are always punctual, because punctuality is part of the service they're selling, the service of making an overwhelming and terrible thing feel managed, handled, under control. He's a lean, dark-suited man of about 50, with a face professionally arranged in sympathetic gravity that sits naturally on features that seem to have been made for it. One of those men who appear to have been born into a particular occupation and match it entirely. He comes in, sits across from your mother, produces his notebook. The first question is about arrangements, not about budget, not directly, not yet. He asks what kind of arrangements did she have in mind, which is the same question dressed in different clothes, and your mother, who is exhausted and hasn't been sleeping properly for nearly 2 weeks, begins to tell him what your father would have wanted, which is not the same thing as what she can afford, which is not the same thing as what is expected of a family of your social standing in this neighbourhood. These 3 things are about to have a very uncomfortable conversation. The funeral industry in 1884 operates primarily on shame, not cynically, not maliciously. Mr. Goff is not a villain. He's a man running a business in a market that has been very carefully constructed over several decades. But the entire apparatus rests on a foundation of social expectation that makes it nearly impossible for middle and lower middle class families to have an adequate funeral without spending money they don't have. The consequence of inadequacy is social judgment, swift, visible, long-lasting. People talk, people remember. A funeral that was insufficient in its observances becomes part of the story of a family, a mark against their respectability that attaches to them for years. The children feel it. The widow feels it most. You cannot afford an inadequate funeral for your father. You also, in the simplest financial sense, cannot afford an adequate one. The hearse, Mr. Goff explains, can be furnished with 2 horses or 4. 4 is what is expected for a man of your father's position, a respectable man of business, a steady member of the community, known in the church and the neighbourhood. 2 is cheaper, 2 will be noticed. The plumes on the horses, black ostrich feathers, worn on the animals' headpieces, swaying with each step, dramatic and traditional. You can hire fewer plumes or cheaper ones. This will also be noticed. The coffin, elm for the outer shell, lined with quilted fabric, furnished with the appropriate handle sets and nameplate. Your father's name, his dates, the inscription of his going. The nameplate is the last formal inscription of his name. It seems important that it be done properly. The mutes. Mutes are men hired to stand outside the door of the house on the day of the funeral, dressed entirely in black, wearing long crape scarves called hatbands, holding wands draped with black silk. They stand in silence, absolute silence. They don't speak, they barely move. They stand flanking the front door as mourners arrive and depart, a living emblem of grief so complete it has gone beyond words entirely. You can hire 2 mutes, or 4, or none. None is cheapest and will be remarked upon. The pall, the large black cloth that drapes over the coffin during the procession, plain or with a border. The depth of the border tells observers something about the quality of the household. The printed cards on black bordered paper to be sent to everyone who should know. The grave. Your father is going to Kensal Green, the great Victorian cemetery to the northwest of the city, opened in 1833 as London's burial grounds grew hopelessly overcrowded, as they'd been growing for decades, as the old churchyards filled up layer by layer, until the ground was, in the most literal sense, composed of the compacted dead. Kensal Green is orderly, landscaped, regulated, the Victorian response to the chaos of the old graveyards. There are purchased plots with headstones, and there are common graves, which are where they put people when no plot is purchased, and which are, to say it plainly, not where your father is going if it can possibly be avoided. A purchased plot, an elm coffin, properly furnished, 2 horses, not 4, this has been quietly decided, with good plumes, 2 mutes, the correct pall, the printed cards, a respectable funeral, not elaborate, appropriate, the kind that will not occasion comment. The cost will be somewhere between £7 and £9. Your father made 35 shillings a week, roughly £91 a year. The funeral will cost approximately what he earned in a full month of work. And here is the thing about your father. The fact that arrives now in Mr. Goff's quiet recitation of figures that causes something to shift in your chest. Your father took out a funeral insurance policy some years ago. A penny a week policy, the kind that working people and careful lower middle class people all over London take out for exactly this reason. Paying a coin a week to guarantee that when this day came their family would not be ruined by the cost of burying them. Penny in, week after week after week. Tea money, he must have thought of it, or something close. Not noticeable. Just there, going somewhere, for when it was needed. It pays out £10. £10. Just enough. Just enough for the funeral that won't shame the family. That gives your father what he deserves. That doesn't mark your mother as someone whose husband was buried inadequately because there wasn't enough money. Your father, with his ledger-keeper's mind and his ink-stained fingers and his particular laugh, had thought of this. Had thought of you, specifically of this moment, of standing in this room with this man and this notebook, and had arranged for there to be enough. You look at the floor for a moment. Then you look back at Mr. Goff and tell him yes. 2 horses, the elm coffin, the pall with the border, 2 mutes, the proper cards, the plot at Kensal Green. Mr. Goff writes it all down in his neat, unhurried hand and closes the notebook and tells you the coffin will come tomorrow and the funeral will be on Friday, and he expresses his condolences with the dignity of a man who says this many times a week and means it each time, or has learned to mean it, which may be the same thing. He leaves. Your mother sits very still for a moment after the door closes. He planned for it, she says. Yes. Another silence. That's your father. That is your father. Every penny of it. Now. The mourning clothes. Your mother's dress, her ordinary black dress worn for church and for days when dark clothing's appropriate, is not mourning dress. Not the right fabric. Not the right cut. Not crucially made of crape. And crape is non-negotiable. This is the word, crape, that is going to dominate the next 2 years of your mother's life, and it's worth understanding what it actually is before we go any further. Crape. Not the French silk crape you've seen in dressmakers' windows, light and elegant and decorative. English crape, the specific fabric produced primarily by Courtaulds, the manufacturer in Bocking in Essex that has, over the decades of Victoria's reign, built a fortune almost entirely out of grief. English crape is crimped, crinkled silk that has been given a matte finish through a proprietary treatment involving heat and starch that makes the surface dull, non-reflective, texturally rough. It is entirely appropriate for mourning because mourning abhors anything that catches light, anything that says "look at me with pleasure," anything decorative or festive. Crape absorbs, crape swallows. It is by design the fabric of darkness. It is also by experience unpleasant to wear. It is scratchy. It is heavy. The crinkled surface catches on everything, on lace, on other fabric, on your skin when it makes contact with your wrist. Like the world is gently but persistently snagging you, holding you back. When it gets wet, which in London in November it will do constantly, it stiffens and smells. A faintly chemical, faintly earthy smell, the ghost of the industrial process that makes it, inseparable once you've encountered it from the smell of mourning itself. Women who went through the Victorian mourning period remember this smell long afterward. It becomes the smell of grief, specifically, encoded in memory as completely as the smell of the particular cologne your father wore, or the particular tea your mother makes. Your mother must have crape. Must. There is no version of respectable widowhood in 1884 that does not involve crape, and the crape must be present in the correct proportion. Trimming on the dress, a veil, a bonnet, the widow's cap. The degree of crape coverage signals the degree and recency of mourning. New widows wear more crape than those a year in. This is visible to anyone who looks. Everyone looks. For a widow, full mourning lasts 2 years. 2 years. This is the standard. The first year and some months in deep mourning. All black, all crape, no jewellery except jet. Jet being the specific black gemstone from Whitby in Yorkshire. Fossilised wood polished to a deep gleam, which is the single acceptable ornament during deep mourning. Then half mourning, grey, purple, lavender, white appearing in graduated reintroduction, colours permitted in increasing degrees over the months until the full 2 years have passed, and colour is fully restored. For you, 1 year in black, you are his daughter. For William, a black coat, black hatband, black gloves, black bordered handkerchiefs. Men's mourning, always less demanding than women's, always less expensive, always easier to fulfill and harder to judge insufficient. The calculus of grief in this period, the specific, publicly visible burden of performing correct mourning, falls heaviest on women. It always falls heaviest on women. Thursday morning you take your mother to Jay's mourning warehouse, 247 and 249 Regent Street, London. You know the frontage. Everyone in London knows the frontage. The black painted windows, the gold lettering on black ground, the discreet statement of a business that has been serving this particular need since 1841 and grown, decade by decade, into an establishment of considerable size and singular purpose. Jay's sells nothing but mourning goods, nothing but black, nothing but grief rendered into fabric and ribbon and paper and jewellery. It is the largest dedicated mourning retailer in the world. It makes every year a great deal of money from the worst days of a great many people's lives. Regent Street itself is wide and fashionable. John Nash's great architectural statement, the principal shopping thoroughfare of a city that prides itself on its commerce and its elegance. Walking south toward Jay's, you pass drapers showing the autumn season's fabrics in warm golds and deep burgundies, a chocolatier with its window dressed in confections, a milliner with bonnets trimmed in velvet ribbon, women in fashionable dress. The street is bright and purposeful and cold, and then Jay's. The window is dressed with restraint. Not festive, not attractive in any conventional sense, just fabric, draped lengths of black crape and bombazine and parramatta, arranged with precise, austere elegance that communicates immediately. This establishment understands that you're here on serious business and will treat you accordingly. There are jet earrings on a small velvet stand in the corner of the window, a widow's cap in white lawn with perfectly pressed weepers, no colour anywhere. Inside, the smell arrives first. Woolen dye and the distinctive chemical note of crape concentrated by the fact that everything in this building is crape or related to crape. Thousands of bolts, hundreds of garments, the entire inventory of mourning. And under that, cedar from the wardrobes they've lined everything in, lavender water used somewhere on the upper floors, the particular warm wool smell of new fabric just delivered. The light is slightly dimmer than on the street, the dark fabrics absorbing rather than reflecting. A woman in black comes to you within moments, not hovering, present, calm. "How long?" she asks your mother. Just those 2 words. She means, how many days since the death? 5 days, your mother says. The woman nods. She knows exactly what you need. What your mother needs, as a widow in full mourning, a dress in parramatta, a silk and wool mixture that hangs more gracefully than pure wool, and is marginally less punishing to wear, though it must be trimmed with crape at the collar, cuffs, hem, and wherever convention demands. Crape trim everywhere. The dress will be black, all black, an elaborate construction that encases your mother entirely in the correct texture and degree of grief. The assistant's pencil moves quietly. Fabric length, making up fee, trimming costs. £3 and some shillings for the dress alone. More than a week of your father's wages, the widow's cap. White lawn, precisely folded with the streamers, the weepers that hang down the back. This cap must be worn indoors at all times for the first period of mourning and outdoors, whenever she's not wearing the full veil. The shape of it, the length of the weepers, the arrangement of the fold, convention specifies all of these, and people who know about such things, and everyone knows about such things, will notice if they're wrong. The veil. Oh, the veil. A widow's mourning veil is a length of crape that falls from the bonnet over the face and down to somewhere below the knee. When worn properly, it obscures the face almost completely. A moving, breathing enclosure of grief that announces your mother's status from 50 feet away. Not just bereaved. Widow. Widow in full mourning. The veil is protective and performative simultaneously. It hides her face from scrutiny while making her completely legible to the social world around her. People give way to a woman in a mourning veil. They moderate their behaviour. They do not make frivolous remarks. They understand from a distance that this woman is owed a particular consideration, and that normal rules of engagement are temporarily suspended in her favour. 3 pairs of black kid gloves, sufficient black bordered handkerchiefs, jet brooch for the collar, all itemised, all priced, and your dress, black, less elaborate, appropriate for a daughter in mourning. Crape trim at the hem and cuffs, correct. The bill is written out on black bordered paper. Of course it is. Everything at Jay's is on blackboarded paper, even the receipts, even the accounts. There is a consistency to this that is either admirably thorough or slightly overwhelming, and probably both. More than £5 for the minimum. Your mother pays what she can and arranges the remainder on account, which Jay's accommodates without difficulty, because Jay's is a business that understands its clientele's financial circumstances and would always rather have them in proper mourning on credit than seen on the street in insufficient black. The dresses will be ready tomorrow. Making up happens in the workshops on the upper floors, garments completed for bereaved clients with impressive speed. The industrial scale of Victorian grief demands it. By Friday morning, your mother will have what she needs for the funeral. You walk out onto Regent Street. The fashionable world continues. Women in colours, men in ordinary dark business dress, nothing like mourning dress, just the respectable dark wool of working London. A flower seller on the corner with chrysanthemums, which gives you a small lurch of the stomach because chrysanthemums are what you buy for funerals, and you'll need to think about flowers. Your mother takes your hand. She's wearing her ordinary black gloves, not the mourning ones. Her coat is not adequately black by proper standards, but the funeral is tomorrow, and a widow in the first week is permitted the grace of not yet being fully equipped. Convention, like people, occasionally extends mercy. We'll manage, your mother says. Neither of you elaborates on this. You walk toward the cab stand. The viewing goes on for 2 days. Thursday brings the neighbours first, then the relatives, then the acquaintances from church. There is a pattern to it that becomes apparent by the second hour. A knock at the door, you opening it. The slightly adjusted face of someone who has come to do something difficult and is doing it anyway. The brief exchange at the door, then the parlour. Some of them cry, some of them do not. Some of them say things that are exactly right. Mrs. Price from next door says nothing at all, only holds your mother's hands for a long moment, and then goes in and pays her respects and comes out again. And some of them say things that are completely wrong, the well-meaning blunders that follow grief like a shadow, that at least he didn't sufferings, the God needed him more, that you must be so relieved he's not in pain anymore, which are all intended kindly and land variously. You receive all of it. That is your function for these days. Receive it, acknowledge it, thank them for coming. The performance of correct grief does not mean pretending to feel more than you do, or less. It means channeling what you feel into the forms that the community recognizes and can respond to. It means being present at the door, presentable if not yet properly mourning dressed, available to be seen. It means not collapsing in the hallway, not because collapsing would be wrong, but because the hallway is where people come and go and your mother needs you upright. The parlour. Your father lies on the boards that Mrs. Hodgson thought more suitable than the sofa, covered to the chest with the white sheet, his good shirt properly arranged, his hands folded, his face composed. The dish of salt on the table, the stopped clock on the mantel, chrysanthemums from the flower cellar. Your Aunt Frances brought them, great white heads of them, arranged in a vase on the windowsill, and their smell fills the room, clean and slightly bitter, the smell of November and of the specific kind of occasion that requires flowers for reasons that are not decorative. Flowers because the smell of flowers is better than the smell of other things. Flowers because living things belong in a room with the dead, some instinct says so. Flowers because the Romans brought them to tombs and someone's grandmother brought them to viewings, and it is therefore what you do. You go in yourself on Thursday night after the last visitor has gone. Late. Mrs. Hodgson has finally been persuaded to go home, and William is in the back parlour reading something he's not actually reading, and your mother is upstairs, and the house is quiet for the first time in 2 days of steady coming and going. You go in alone. The candle has burned down and been replaced. Someone has added another log to the fire. The chrysanthemums have released more scent in the warmth of the evening. It's stronger now, that clean, bitter note, filling the room entirely. The white cloth, the folded hands, the stopped clock on the mantel with its unmoving hands. 2:31. You sit in the chair at the side of the boards and you stay for about 20 minutes, and you don't say anything, and you don't cry. Not yet. There seems to be some interior decision being made that the crying is for later, when there is time for it, when the machinery of the necessary has released you, and you're no longer required to be a person who handles things. The crying is waiting. You can feel it waiting. You look at his hands. The ink stains on his fingers still there. They don't wash out, the ledger keeper's mark. They're in the skin from years of daily use, and the washing that evening never quite reached. His hands, the ones that wrapped your Christmas present in tissue paper and wrote the card in his particular slanted hand, the ones that did the adding and subtracting and the careful daily recording of other people's money for 31 years. You put your hand over his. They're cold. Obviously cold. You knew they would be cold, but the knowing and the feeling are different things entirely, and the cold is the thing that does it finally, the actual physical fact of it. The coldness of a hand that used to be warm, of all the warmth that was in those hands and is not now, and you sit in the candle-lit parlour with the chrysanthemums and the salt and the stopped clock, and you cry, quietly, for a considerable amount of time, and nobody comes in, and nobody needs to. Friday morning. You're awake before the light, not from sleep. You've been in and out of sleep for hours, surfacing and going under, the kind of night where the mind won't commit to either waking or rest, but insists on flickering between them. You get up at 6, while the house is still dark. Wash your face from the cold basin. Dress. Go downstairs. The morning dress arrived yesterday afternoon as promised. It's hanging in the back parlour covered in brown paper. You unwrap it now in the kitchen light, in the early morning quiet. Your mother's dress first. Parramatta, as ordered, deep black, the crape trim at the collar and cuffs and hem precise and correct, the seams well finished, the construction sound. Jay's does not cut corners. Jay's has a reputation built on the grief of London, and it maintains that reputation garment by garment. You hang it on the hook by the door and look at it. It looks like mourning. It looks like exactly what it is. Your own dress underneath, wrapped separately. Less elaborate but correct. Black wool with crape trim, the hem done properly, the collar plain. You put it on. It takes a moment to arrange, the fastening at the back, the cuffs that button slightly higher than your ordinary dress, the collar that sits closer to the throat. The fabric is heavier than what you're used to. You stand in the kitchen in the black dress in the early morning, and you look like someone attending a funeral, which you are, which is strange to think and strange to wear, and at the same time completely straightforward. This is what today is. The dress is telling the truth. The crape trim catches on the linen of your cuffs as you move your arms, a small snagging resistance, barely perceptible. By the end of the day you'll have noticed it 100 times. Your mother comes down at 7. You help her into her dress. The Parramatta is heavier than yours. More fabric, more crape, more of everything. And there's a particular way to arrange the collar that requires a second pair of hands and a certain amount of patience. You pin the jet brooch at her throat. Small, oval, polished to a deep shine that is not a shine so much as a depth. Jet doesn't reflect light the way other stones do. It seems to absorb it, to hold it somewhere inside the dark material. You pin the widow's cap, white lawn, the weepers pressed and correct falling behind her ears. She looks at you. You look at her. There are no mirrors to look in, all of them still covered. She reaches up and touches the cap's edge, checking it by feel. It's correct. You tell her so. William comes down in his black coat, his hatband in order, his face composed with the effort of 22-year-old men who have been told all their lives that composure is what is required of them, and are discovering that requirement on its hardest day. Aunt Frances arrives at 8:30 with your sisters Mary and Ellen, fetched from Holloway. Ellen is 8 years old, small and very serious, her dark hair in neat plaits, wearing her best dark dress that is not mourning dress exactly, but is the darkest thing she owns, which is understood to be sufficient for a child. She comes in the front door and looks around the house with the particular focused attention of a child registering that something is very different, that the mirrors are covered and the candles are on in the daytime, and there are flowers and a lot of adults looking at her in a certain way. She goes straight to your mother and puts both arms around her without saying anything. Mary, 11, stands in the hallway for a moment looking at the cloth over the mirror. Her face does something complicated. She looks at you. "Is he still in there?" she asks, meaning the parlour. "Yes," you say. "Do you want to go in?" She thinks about this with the serious deliberation of an 11-year-old making a real decision. "Yes," she says. You take her in. You stand beside her. She looks at him for a long time, very still, very serious, and then she nods once as if something has been confirmed and takes your hand and you both go back out. Mr. Guff arrives at 9 with his men. 2 assistants, both in black, both carrying the coffin, elm as arranged with the handles properly set, the nameplate affixed, your father's name, his dates, the brief inscription your mother chose, beloved husband and father. The coffin is brought in through the front door and carried to the parlour, and your family waits in the back room and the hallway while Mr. Goff's men do what needs doing, and the sounds from the parlour are quiet and deliberate and take about 20 minutes. The mutes take their positions outside the front door at 10 o'clock. 2 men in black wearing long crape hat bands that drape from their hats down their backs, holding wands wrapped in black silk. They stand on either side of the front door, perfectly still, perfectly silent. The street has been going about its business all morning. Carts passing, the coal merchant calling, the general mid-morning activity of a terrace of working London. And now, quite suddenly, there are 2 black-clad men standing like sentinels at number 17, and the street adjusts. People walk past more slowly. Some stop briefly and look and walk on. The word has been given that the funeral is today, and the visible presence of the mutes makes it official, makes it public, turns a private tragedy into a neighbourhood event that requires the neighbourhood's acknowledgement. The hearse arrives at 10:30. 2 horses, as arranged. Black, well matched, their manes braided and their headpieces carrying the ostrich plume arrangements, black feathers in careful tiers, swaying with each small movement of the animals' heads, dramatic and traditional and genuinely striking in the flat grey November light. The horses' coats have been polished to a deep shine. They stand with the patience of animals that have done this many times and know what is required. Stillness, steadiness, a certain sombre dignity that they maintain without any apparent effort. The hearse itself is a glass-sided vehicle, the coffin visible through the glass panels, an entirely Victorian innovation. Before the glass hearses became standard, coffins were hidden from view. The Victorians, with their particular relationship to death, decided it was better to see. And the whole equipage, the black horses with their plumes, the glass hearse, the liveried attendants, the two mutes at the door, presents to the street a statement about the man being buried today, a statement about his worth, about your family's commitment to honouring him properly, about the kind of people you are. This is what the money is for. This is what the £10 goes toward. Not the wood of the coffin or the silk lining or the nameplate. Not exactly, though those matter too. What it pays for is the statement, the visible, public, undeniable statement that this man deserved ceremony and received it. You think about this standing at the front room window watching the horses stand, and you think your father understood this when he paid his penny a week for however many years, understood that the £10 was not for him, he'd be past caring about hearses, but for the rest of you, standing at windows and at doors, needing to be able to say, we did this properly. The coffin is brought out. Mr. Gorf and his two men carry it on their shoulders from the parlour, through the hallway, out the front door between the mutes, and into the street where the hearse waits. The movement is practised and careful and dignified. The coffin slides into the hearse. The glass panels give it back to the November light. Your mother walks out behind it, William at her side, you and Mary behind them, Ellen holding your hand, Aunt Frances bringing up the rear. The street has lined itself quietly, the way streets in working neighbourhoods do when there is a funeral. People at their windows, one or two standing at their gates, hats removed, heads slightly bowed. Mrs. Hodgson is there, standing at her own gate, her hands folded, and she looks at your mother with the expression of someone who has stood at her own gate in her own grief, and knows precisely what is being walked past today. Your mother walks with her head up. The widow's veil falls over her face. You can barely see her expression through it, which is both the point and the mercy. Beneath the crape her face could be anything. It is not available for assessment. She walks, and the crape sways with her step, and the weepers trail behind, and she looks like mourning made ambulant, like grief given a body and a direction. The procession moves, the hearse first, slow step by slow step, the horses' plumes nodding, Mr. Gough walking immediately behind it, then your family, then the two mutes falling in behind, their silence extending to their walk. They make no sound as they move, a deliberate quality of near invisibility for men who are nevertheless entirely visible. Behind them, the neighbours who are coming to the church, Mrs. Hodgson, Mrs. Price, two men who knew your father from the counting house and arrived this morning in good black coats. The street watches you go. You've walked this street your entire life. You know every house front, every gate, every uneven cobblestone, the way the light falls between the terraces in the morning. You've walked it going to school, going to the shops, going to church on Sundays. You've walked it in every season and every weather. You know exactly where the drain is that your father told you not to walk over, because it had given way twice already, and one of these days would give way properly. You walk over it now, and it holds, and you keep walking, and the hearse moves ahead of you through the familiar street, and turns the corner toward the Marylebone Road. And that's the street you grew up on going behind you now. And the last thing you see before you turn the corner is the front door of number 17, still open, with the black cloth in the front room window, and the front step cleanly whitened for the occasion, because Mrs. Hodgson whitened it at 7 this morning without being asked. The church is 20 minutes' walk. St. James's, the one whose bells you've been counting by for all the days since the clock stopped. The streets you walk through adjust to you as you pass. Carts slow, hats come off. People stop on the footpath and wait for you to go by. This is the street acknowledging that something is being carried through it, something significant, something that warrants a moment of human deference. Even people who never met your father and couldn't tell you his name recognize the hearse and the black horses and the mourning figures walking behind and perform the small natural act of acknowledgement. It costs nothing. It is nonetheless something. Grief is witnessed by strangers, and the witnessing matters even when, perhaps especially when, the strangers don't know why. The church is cold. St. James's in November has the cold of a stone building that is never entirely warm, a cold that has seeped into the walls over centuries and will not be entirely displaced by whatever fires are lit in the nave. The pews are wooden, the hassocks worn, the windows casting the flat grey light of a November morning in pale squares on the stone floor. The organ plays quietly when you enter, something slow and familiar that you half recognise without being able to name. You sit in the front pew with your family. The service is the one everyone gets, more or less. The words that have been said for centuries over everyone who goes into the ground in this country, the words that address both the irreversibility of what has happened and the particular theology of what comes after. The vicar has known your father for years. He says a few words about him specifically. The ink-stained fingers, the steadiness, the quality of showing up reliably, of being the kind of person that other people count on, which is not a grand quality but is a real one, is the quality your father had more than any other, and hearing it named and acknowledged in a cold church on a November morning by a man who knew him does something in the vicinity of your throat that you attend to carefully. Ellen cries during the service, not loudly, not dramatically. The quiet crying of a child who doesn't fully understand but understands enough. You hold her hand. Mary does not cry. Mary sits very straight with her hands folded in her lap and her face doing the thing it does when she's holding something in, that 11-year-old quality of ferocious internal management. She's the one who'll cry later, alone, probably at night, probably for longer than anyone else. That's Mary. William stares at the middle distance during most of the service, occasionally blinking. He's going to have to go back to Manchester. He's told your mother he'll stay until Monday, which is 4 more days, and you're grateful for the 4 days and already dreading when they end and it becomes just the 2 of you. Just the 2 of you and 2 younger sisters, and a house, and 35 shillings a week that isn't coming. Not now, you tell yourself, not here. After the service, the coffin is carried back to the hearse, and the procession makes its way to Kensal Green. The cemetery is northwest of Marble Arch, reached by a route that takes you through streets increasingly unfamiliar to you. Your geography of London is the geography of a particular neighbourhood, of the routes between home and the city and the shops on the main road and the park on Sundays, and this is beyond your usual territory, broader streets, a different quality of the city. The hearse moves steadily through it all. The horses maintain their pace without being hurried. The plumes sway. Kensal Green Cemetery opened in 1833. It was the first of the great Victorian garden cemeteries, the answer to the crisis of the overflowing burial grounds in the city's churchyards, where the dead had been layered and relayered for centuries until the ground was not so much earth as compacted human remains, and the wells nearby tasted of it, and the people who lived nearby died of things that came from it. The new cemeteries were planned and landscaped and regulated, with gates and lodges and maintained paths between the sections, Anglican and dissenters in separate grounds, purchased plots and common graves, and a hierarchy of the dead that mirrors the hierarchy of the living with unsettling precision. The wealthy are buried in the main Anglican section with large monuments. You pass some of them as Mr. Guff leads you through the gates, elaborate Victorian stonework, obelisks and draped urns and weeping female figures in marble, the permanent architecture of demonstrated grief, stone equivalents of everything the crape and the plumes communicate, but lasting past the mourning period and the years after and into whatever comes after that. Your father's grave is in a quieter section, purchased, properly purchased, which means it will be his and only his, marked with a headstone that will come later. The headstone is a separate expense, deferred for now, to be organised in the coming months when the immediate financial shock has settled. For now, the grave is marked with a wooden stake and a card with his name on it, the temporary marker of a recently dug plot. The earth is raw, November earth, dark and slightly wet, clods of London clay turned up by the gravedigger and piled to the side. The coffin is lowered on straps. The words are said again. Earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Words so old they feel like the ground itself saying something. Your mother throws a handful of earth. It lands on the elm lid with a sound that is distinct and irreversible, and you absorb it without flinching because there is nothing to be done about it, nothing to do except absorb it, and this is what you do. The gravediggers wait at a respectful distance. They'll fill it in after you've gone. This is part of the service. You don't watch the grave be filled. You pay for not watching. You walk back to the gate. The cemetery is quieter than the city around it, obviously, but it is not silent. Sparrows in the yew trees. A crow somewhere. Calling. Distant traffic. A child's voice from the lodge at the gate. The gravedigger's family, apparently, carrying on as families do in close proximity to the dead. A robin on a headstone, investigating something in the moss. The city goes on. Even here, even in the designated place for the dead, the living city goes on around the edges. Your mother stands at the gate for a moment, looking back. Then she turns and walks through it. The long way home by cab, Mr. Guff has arranged them, is largely quiet. Your mother sits with her hands in her black-gloved lap and her veil slightly lifted now that you're among family, and she looks at the streets going past the cab window with the expression of someone returning to a world they left briefly and are not certain they recognise. William says, "We'll be all right." Your mother says, "Yes." You say nothing because both of them are saying what they believe or what they need to believe, and there is no need for a third voice on the subject. You'll be all right. You don't know if that's true, but you're going to find out. The house when you return. The front door opened by Aunt Frances, who stayed behind. The smell of the house, coal smoke and the fading chrysanthemums and the particular air of a house that has had a great many people moving through it for 4 days and is slightly dishevelled at the molecular level. Warm human presence layered into the rooms. The parlour door open. The sofa has been moved back to its original position. Mr. Goff's men did this when they took the boards away this morning, and the room looks almost normal, almost the same as it always was, except that the mirror above the fireplace is still covered, obviously, and the clock on the mantel still reads 2:31. There's food on the kitchen table. More neighbours have been. More of the neighbourly feeding that sustains the bereaved household through the first impossible days. A pie, a pot of soup on the range, bread, a seed cake in a tin. You eat, most of you, or go through the motions of eating, which amounts to the same thing in terms of maintaining the body's continued function. Ellen falls asleep in the chair after supper. She's been awake since before 6 and has been extremely serious all day, which takes it out of a person. You carry her upstairs. She doesn't wake. The smallness of her in your arms is very specific and very real. Later that night, after William has gone to the back parlour to sleep on the sofa and your mother has gone upstairs and the house is quiet, you sit in the kitchen with a cup of tea and you think about what comes next. What comes next is this: 6 weeks of deep mourning before any social visits are made or received other than necessary ones. No theatre, no concerts, no parties, though parties are not much your family's concern in any case. No new clothes except mourning clothes. No jewellery except jet. No colour anywhere. The household's entire visible surface must remain black. The stationery your mother uses for correspondence will be black bordered, the width of the border decreasing as the months pass and the mourning gradually lifts. The visiting cards are reprinted with a black border. Everything visible from outside the household declares we are still in grief. We are still in the correct period of mourning. We are behaving as we ought. The mirrors stay covered for the duration of the wake, and for a short period after the burial. Opinions vary on exactly how long. Some say until after the burial, some say a week, and this is one of the places where different households and different parts of the country have slightly different practices, because folk belief is not law and does not have a single authority. Mrs. Hodgson says a week after the burial, and Mrs. Hodgson is not challenged on this. The clock stays stopped until the body has left the house. Your father left the house this morning. The clocks can restart today, but you haven't restarted them yet. It's evening, gone 9, the house quiet around you, and the kitchen clock still stopped at whatever time you stilled it on Tuesday afternoon. And you realise you haven't restarted it yet because the day has been what it has been and the thought kept being displaced by other thoughts. And now you're sitting here and the kitchen clock is stopped and the mantel clock in the parlour reads 2:31 and the bracket clock in the hallway is stopped and the travel clock in the bedroom is stopped and the church bells have been your timekeepers for 4 days. You could restart them now. Tonight. It's appropriate. You sit with your tea for a moment. Then you get up. You go to the kitchen clock first. You reach up and free the pendulum with one finger, exactly the reverse of how you stopped it, and it swings. The first tick sounds loud in the quiet kitchen, enormous, like a door opening. Then the second. Then the regular rhythm establishes itself. And the clock is going again, ticking the seconds of Friday the 18th of November back into existence, picking up time from wherever time lives when it's not being counted. The kitchen clock reads just after 9. You set it to 9:15, which is your best estimate from the church bells, and then you go to the hallway, the bracket clock. The tick of this one is slightly different in pitch. Older mechanism, different resonance in the wood of the shelf. You set it. You go to the parlour, the mantel clock, the gilt case, the Roman numerals, the china dogs on either side, your father's photograph in its place between them, the still hands at 2:31. You open the little door, you reach in, you set the pendulum going, tick, and then tick again, and again. And the mantel clock rejoins the world and reads 2:31 for about 30 seconds while you watch the minute hand. And then the hand moves, very slowly, past 31 and toward 32, and away from the moment that was being held and preserved by the mechanism's silence for the past 4 days. 231 is gone. It exists now only in the death notice, in the church register, in the documents and letters where it was written down. Not in this room any longer. This room is now 9:17 in the evening of Friday the 18th of November, 1884, and tomorrow morning it will be a new day, and the clocks will tell you so, and time, which was never actually stopped, will be acknowledged as having continued. You stand at the mantel for a moment. The clock ticks. The stopped clocks were, it turns out, as much for the living as for the dead. Not just the performative message to the neighbours, not just the symbolic correspondence between the house and the event. They were for you, for the family, for the period in which you needed the house to agree with what had happened, to stop alongside you, to not carry on as if nothing had changed when everything had changed. The clock stopped so you didn't have to pretend the time was just the time. So the house could hold what happened without immediately pushing past it. And now they're going again. Not because you've finished grieving, not by a considerable stretch, but because the acute phase, the body in the house, the immediate emergency, the 4 days of suspending ordinary time, that phase is complete. The house can move forward with you now. Time can be your ally again rather than your adversary. You look at the photograph between the china dogs. Your parents, young, stiff, slightly terrified, proud. 1865 or thereabouts. Before you, before William, before any of it. You close the clock's little door. You go up to bed. What follows in the weeks after the funeral is a different kind of strange. The house, without the clock stop and the wake and the constant coming and going, settles into a new quiet that is not the same as ordinary quiet. It is the quiet of a household that has had its central organising principle removed. The 35 shillings a week, the thing that determined the shape of every day, the going out in the morning, the coming back in the evening, the structure that the household was built around, gone, and the household still standing, still needing coal and food and rent, still needing to be organised and run, and having to figure out how to do all of that without the mechanism that previously made it possible. Your mother is a capable woman. This needs to be said clearly, because it is easy to look at a Victorian widow and see only the victim of circumstance, and she is that too, undeniably. But she is also someone who has been running a household on 35 shillings a week for 23 years, and knows exactly how much coal costs and exactly where to find a cheaper butcher and exactly how to make a piece of beef stretch across 3 different meals. She knows how to manage. She's been managing all her adult life. What she does not know is how to make money. This is the specific gap. Managing money and making it are different skills, and she has, by the design of the world she was born into, and the conventions she has lived inside, only ever had the first. There are options. There are always options for women in her position, though none of them are pleasant. Lodgers, the spare room, your father's study, the small room at the back that held his desk and his few books, could be let to someone. This is common. This is how the terraces of London are full of households that include a single man or woman who is not family, who pays a weekly sum for a room, and sometimes board, and about whose presence the landlady feels some combination of gratitude and mild humiliation depending on the day. Taking lodgers is not disgraceful. It is nonetheless a visible accommodation of diminished circumstances. It means someone outside the family eating at the kitchen table and using the back stairs. Your mother decides on this. A young man from somewhere in the home counties who works at a solicitor's office in the city and needs somewhere respectable and affordable between here and his office. He moves in December. He is quiet. He is clean. He is gone by 8 in the morning and back at 7 in the evening, and he asks for very little and pays 7 shillings a week, which is 7 shillings a week more than was coming in from that room before. 7 shillings, not 35, but something. You yourself are working. You've been working since last spring, a position at a milliner's in the Marylebone High Street, making hats and occasionally minding the counter, which pays 12 shillings a week, and which, with the lodger's 7, and with what William sends from Manchester when he can, makes 26 shillings, give or take. Not 35, but not nothing. The question of mourning and working is a delicate one. Mourning dress must be worn. You wear yours to work every day. The black dress, the crape trim, the black gloves when you can afford to keep them clean, the black bordered handkerchief, and the milliner, Mrs. Farthing, who is a pragmatic woman who has had employees in mourning before, says nothing about it except to note that perhaps the crape trim should be maintained more carefully as it is visible to customers. You agree. The crape trim sheds, which is one of crape's particular qualities. It drops tiny fragments of itself wherever it goes, small dark filaments on everything it touches, on your work surfaces, on the hats, on the hands of the women making the hats. It is present everywhere. It is relentless in its presence. The smell of crape intensifies when it gets wet, and November in London means getting wet. Arriving at work in the morning after a 15-minute walk in damp November air, your dress has taken on the specific cold chemical smell that becomes, for this year, your constant companion. You stop noticing it after about 3 weeks. People who haven't been in mourning notice it when they stand close to you. This is one of the minor social inconveniences of Victorian mourning dress that nobody warns you about. You smell like your grief, specifically, and you smell like it to other people, while not being able to smell it yourself. The condolence calls begin about 10 days after the funeral. This is the other side of the performance. Not just you presenting yourself for public viewing as a correctly grieving family, but other people coming to demonstrate that they acknowledge your grief and have paused their ordinary lives to say so in person. Condolence visits are required. Social obligation works in both directions. You must be visitable, and people must visit. They come in the afternoons, mostly. Women, primarily. Your mother receives them in the front parlour. The same parlour where your father was laid out, now back to its normal arrangement. The boards gone, the sofa back in place, the chrysanthemums long since disposed of, replaced by nothing because flowers seem for the moment not quite right, and serves them tea and is visited for about 30 minutes per person, and has the same conversation in different versions many times. The conversation goes, how are you managing, and he was such a good man, and if there's anything I can do, and you must be so proud of how you're holding up, and time heals. Time heals is said by almost everyone in almost those exact words, which either means it's true and universally recognized as true, or means it's the specific platitude that a certain culture defaults to, because it is true enough to be believed and vague enough to be inoffensive. Possibly both. You sit in on some of these visits next to your mother on the horsehair sofa that scratches the back of your legs through your mourning dress, and you receive your own smaller version of the condolence, and you drink your tea, and you demonstrate the correct degree of composed sadness that is expected of you. This is not dishonest. You are genuinely composed and genuinely sad. It's just that both of those are also performances, in the sense that they are versions of your internal state rendered visible for other people, shaped by convention into a form the other person can recognize and respond to. All social interaction is performance in this sense. Mourning just makes the convention explicit. One afternoon in December, about 3 weeks after the funeral, your mother's cousin from Hertfordshire comes. A woman of about 50, a widow herself from some years back, named Mrs. Catchpole. A name that she seems entirely unconscious of, and that you have never been able to say aloud with a straight face since you were about 7. She is a thorough, kind, slightly overwhelming woman who talks continuously and means every word of it. She looks at your mother, and then she looks round the parlour, and she sees the black cloth still over the mirror. "Are the mirrors still covered?" she asks with the tone of someone doing a checklist. "Yes," your mother says. "Mrs. Hodgson said a week after the burial." "That's right," Mrs. Catchpole says. "That's quite right. Some people take them down the same day as the burial, but I always think that's rushing it. You need the time." There is a brief discussion, the kind of low-key discussion of custom that happens between women in this era, on the subject of mourning, with the regularity of discussions about weather, which practices are the correct ones, which are too brief, which are too prolonged. What Mrs. Somebody did when her husband died that was commented upon. The expertise is distributed through the neighbourhood, through the female relatives, through the accumulated knowledge of women who have done this before, and remember what the correct length of time was. The mirrors, it is agreed, should come down now, the week after the burial has passed. So on a Wednesday afternoon in December, you take down the black cloth, the parlour mirror first. You need the step again. You're not quite tall enough without it. You climb up, lift the cloth away from the frame, fold it. The mirror reappears. The parlour looks different than you remembered it. Not different exactly. The same furniture, the same faded wallpaper, the same fireplace. But seen for the first time after nearly 3 weeks of the mirror's absence, the room has more depth suddenly, more light, more dimensionality. You'd forgotten how much a mirror does to a room, how it doubles the space visually, how it makes the light move. The parlour is brighter. The room is larger than it felt with the cloth over the glass. You climb down and look at yourself. You're wearing black, obviously. You'll be wearing black for another 9 months at least. The dress, the crape trim, the jet brooch, the gloves pulled off for housework and currently in your pocket. Your hair is correctly pinned, the white lawn collar of the dress visible at the neck. You look like what you are. A young woman in mourning dress just past 19 standing in a Victorian parlour, 3 weeks from a loss that has rearranged the entire structure of her life. You look tired. Not terribly, not dramatically. Just the kind of tired that accumulates over weeks of inadequate sleep and sustained vigilance, and the particular effort of performing composure over a sustained period. There are things in your face that weren't there in October. Not grief, exactly. Not visibly. Not the raw, immediate expression that you'd have found in the mirror in the first days, the bruised-looking eyes and the pallor of acute loss. That's slightly softened. What's replaced it is something steadier. The face of someone who has taken on more weight and is carrying it. The hallway mirror. You take it down. The hallway instantly makes more sense. You'd stopped noticing how dark it was without the mirror's borrowed light, stopped noticing the way the space felt slightly closed in without the visual depth. With the mirror back, the hallway is the hallway you know, narrow and particular and yours, the bedroom mirror. Your mother is in the kitchen and you go up alone to uncover it. The oval glass on the dressing table, tilted slightly toward the chair where your mother sits every morning. You lift the cloth. Her dressing table reappears. The combs, the lavender water, the pin dish, the small wedding photograph, the ordinary items of her mourning. She'll come up later and see them all properly again for the first time in 3 weeks. And the experience of seeing your own dressing table through its mirror after that interval, your own things, your own space, your own face as it looks now, changed by what has happened, will be something she navigates alone, and you won't ask about it. The hand mirror, you carry it to the window to uncover it in good light. Turn it right side up. Look at yourself in the small oval of glass, the one your father gave you so you could always see how fine you look. You look different than you did before the 14th of November. Not terribly different, not unrecognisably, but different in the way that living through something specific always leaves a mark that only shows in certain lights. You fine, basically fine. You think he'd say that, probably. He'd look at you standing here in your black dress on a December morning, with the covered mirrors just uncovered and the clocks going again, and the house reorganised around his absence. And he'd give you that slightly sideways look he had when he was trying not to let you know he was proud of you. And he'd say, "You look fine." You set the mirror face up on the dresser. Now, the months of mourning are long. This needs to be said plainly. You will be wearing black until next November. Your mother will be wearing black until November 1886. That is not a short time to wear one colour to the exclusion of all others, to maintain a specific and publicly visible mode of grief for the benefit of the neighbourhood's assessment of your family's respectability. That is a very long time. And the length of it is not random or arbitrary. The length is modelled in large part on the example of one woman, Queen Victoria. You know this. Everyone in England knows this, whether they've explicitly connected the dots or not. Victoria lost her husband Albert in December 1861, and she has been in mourning since, has been in mourning for 23 years at the time of your father's death. Will be in mourning until her own death in 1901. 40 years. 40 years of black. 40 years of the widowed queen appearing in public in widow's weeds, the white cap, the black dress, Albert's image kept in every room of every palace, his photograph on her pillow, his clothes laid out each morning as if he might return, the water still brought to his dressing room, the official designation of his memory maintained across 4 decades, with an intensity that might be called grief, or might be called love, or might be called both, or might be called something that had, by the 1880s, generated a small industry of commentary and occasional Republican irritation. Whatever you call it in Victoria's case, what it did for the general culture of mourning in England is undeniable. It made mourning fashionable, not fashionable in the frivolous sense, though there was plenty of that too, plenty of fashionable women wearing the latest cut of morning gown with the same attention they'd bring to the latest fashionable colour, but fashionable in the sense of being a recognised and admired mode of being. The widow who mourns long and visibly is, in the Victorian schema, performing a virtue. She is demonstrating the depth of her love. She's showing that her husband was worth this, that he deserved 40 years of black dresses and stopped-heart devotion. This is obviously easier to maintain when you're the Queen of England with palaces and staff and income, and the undisputed right to do as you please. For women like your mother, women with 12 shillings a week coming in from your wage and 7 from the lodger, and various small economies, and the constant background calculation of whether this particular expenditure can be deferred. The fashionableness of Victoria's mourning translates into a social expectation that is costly to meet and costly to fail. You cannot mourn like the Queen. You mourn like yourself, which is to say, correctly, within your means, for the appropriate period, maintaining the correct outward forms while managing simultaneously the very real practical work of keeping the household going in the absence of the man who previously kept it going. This combination, the public performance of grief and the private emergency of survival, is the specific experience of Victorian widowhood for women in your mother's position, and it is not a small thing. It is exhausting in a way that compounds the grief itself, the way any performance is exhausting if you can never come off stage, if there is no backstage available to you, if the audience is always present in the form of the street outside and the neighbours who notice, and the social fabric that rewards correct mourning and withdraws its approval from incorrect mourning, and the result is that you are never simply grieving. You're always grieving visibly, in the approved fashion, for the duration specified. Your mother does it, of course she does, because there is no alternative. Because the alternative is social marginalisation that would make the already difficult circumstances actively worse, and she is a practical woman who understands this calculation, but it is not without cost. And the cost shows, over the months, in small ways, in the quality of her tiredness, which is different from the tiredness of the early weeks, and becomes something more like the tiredness of sustained effort. In the moments when you come into the kitchen and find her standing at the window, looking out at the backyard, with a cup of tea going cold in her hand and the same expression she had in the first days, the one you still can't look at directly. In the way she sometimes stops in the middle of a sentence, as if the sentence has gone somewhere she didn't expect. She's grieving and managing and performing and maintaining all at once for a very long time. You are doing a smaller version of the same. Spring comes. It comes the way it comes in London, reluctantly and in fits. A week of almost warm days in February that pulls the crocuses up in the parks, and then retreats for another month of grey cold before admitting, in mid-March, that yes, this is spring now. It is happening. The plane trees are putting out their first sticky leaves and the window boxes on the main road are being replanted. The birds are making more noise in the mornings. The light lasts a few minutes longer each evening. You notice this. You notice it specifically because for months you have been living inside a very contained world. The house, the work, the narrow path between them, the black dress and the crape that snags and sheds and smells in the rain. The social world contracted by mourning convention to its absolute minimum. And spring is the world expanding slightly, pressing at the edges, insisting that there is more. The crape trim on your dress is wearing. Not badly, Jay's quality holds, but the corners of the cuffs are fraying slightly, the crape becoming more pliable with washing and wearing, which takes some of the harshness out of it, the scratchy resistance of new crape softening into something more worn and familiar. You've been wearing this dress for 6 months. You know it completely. You know which seam pulls slightly when you reach up, and which fastening at the back requires a particular angle to close, and which part of the crape trim catches first on your cuffs. In May, 4.5 months into your year of mourning, you're walking down the Marylebone High Street after work, and you stop outside a draper's window. In the window, a display of spring muslins, white and pale blue and the softest kind of lavender, draped and arranged to show the quality of the fabric in the afternoon light. They look like clouds. They look like the air after rain. They look like everything you have not been wearing for 6 months. You stand at the window and look at them for about a minute. Then you walk on. You have 6 more months of black. More, if you want to be precise about the gradation into half mourning. 6 months until the crape can begin to come off, until grey becomes permissible, until the narrowing black border on your mother's writing paper can narrow further. 6 months is not nothing, 6 months is half a year. But the lavender is there. It exists. In 6 months you will be permitted to wear something like it. And the fact of that permission sitting there on the other side of a specific calendar distance feels like a thing that matters, like a window in the wall. You keep walking. The summer is hot. London in August is always hot and usually unpleasant. The smell of the city concentrates. The Thames goes low and foul. The streets trap heat between the buildings in a way that makes you understand viscerally why people who can afford to leave London in August leave London in August, and understand equally viscerally why people like you cannot. You work through it in the black dress and you sweat through it, and the crape smells worse when it's hot, and you become gradually, irrevocably, extremely tired of the colour black. This tiredness, the simple cumulative fatigue of wearing one colour for month after month, is one of the things that mourning convention seems not to have considered, or perhaps did consider, and decided was appropriate. The physical discomfort of mourning should be uncomfortable. The scratchy crape and the heavy fabric and the colour that absorbs heat in summer, and the colour that makes you invisible in winter, and the smell when it rains. These are not accidents. These are the body's participation in grief, the insistence that mourning should not be purely symbolic but should be felt, should impose itself on the skin and the nose and the temperature of the body wearing it. You have felt it. You have felt it thoroughly. September. Your year of mourning is nearly complete. November will be the official end, the date that marks 12 months from your father's death. But the gradation has already begun, quietly, in the way convention allows. The jet brooch can be joined now by a small piece of plain white lace at the collar, a tiny concession, barely visible, but present. The width of the black border on your stationery has narrowed. These are the grammar of mourning. The way it communicates in small visual adjustments that are legible to people who know how to read them. Your mother is still in her first year. Her second year will be different. The full crepe veil replaced by lighter fabric, the dress allowing more parramatta and less crepe, the white cap still worn but the weepers abbreviated. Half mourning by the 2nd November, grey and white and the softer, permitted purples. By the 2nd spring, the first hint of lavender, the colour that sits between mourning and the world. She is managing, is more than managing in fact. The lodger Mr. Calloway turns out to be useful in small domestic ways that nobody planned for. He knows about chimney sweeping and insists on paying for the sweep in October as his contribution to the household's winter preparation, and he has a dry, mild humour that occasionally surfaces at supper and makes your mother laugh briefly, in a way that surprises her every time, like finding money in a coat pocket. The laugh surprises her. Grief is like this. For a long time it is the dominant condition, the weather you live in, the thing that shapes every day and every moment. And then, slowly, without announcement, other things begin to exist alongside it, not instead of it, not replacing it. Alongside. The laugh at supper alongside the grief that doesn't leave. The spring window display of pale blue muslin alongside the black dress. The clocks ticking again alongside the knowledge of what moment they were stopped to mark. Both things are true. Both can be true. You are learning this. October, the last month of your year. You've been in mourning dress for nearly 12 months. In November, on the 14th, on the anniversary, which you will mark quietly with a visit to Kensal Green, your mother and you and William down from Manchester for the weekend, standing at the purchase plot with its headstone now properly fixed. His name and dates carved in the stone, permanent in November, the year ends. You're not sure what you'll wear on the 15th. Nothing extravagant, nothing festive. That's not who you are, and that's not the transition mourning convention describes in any case. Half mourning for a daughter, after a year, might mean grey or a dark blue that is not quite black, something modest and restrained. The transition is not a reversal. It's a gradual relaxation, a slow re-entry into colour, like eyes adjusting to light after a long time in the dark. But the 15th is coming, and with it the return of something, not the same something. Nothing is the same as it was before the 14th of November last year. Nothing will be, that is simply true, and you have stopped needing it to be untrue, but something. A version of the world that includes colour. A version of yourself not defined entirely by loss. On the 14th of November 1885, exactly 1 year from the stopped clocks, you stand in the kitchen at 2:30 in the afternoon and look at the clock on the wall above the range. It reads 2:28. You watch the minute hand move. 2:29, 2:30, 2:31. You stand very still. The kitchen is quiet around you. Your mother is upstairs, the lodger at his office, your sisters at school. The range is going, the familiar coal smell, the particular warmth of the kitchen at this time of day. The clock hand moves, 2:32, past it, past 2:31, and into the time on the other side of it, the time the mantel clock in the parlour resumed last November when you freed its pendulum on the night of the funeral, the time that has been going forward ever since. The time that is just time now, just the afternoon, just Wednesday. You take a breath. The kettle begins to heat, ticking against the range. You should put the tea on. Your mother will be down shortly and she'll want tea, and it's cold and getting dark and there are things to do before supper, and the day is still going. The ordinary midweek day still moving forward in its ordinary way, because the clocks are going and the mirrors are uncovered and the world has been carrying on all along, even in the year that the house was sealed against it, even in the months of black dress and crape smell and the narrowing of the social world to its minimum. Even then the world went on and carried you in it, forward through time, past the stopped point and into whatever comes after. What comes after? You put the kettle on, you go to the parlour and you look at the mantel clock. 2:33. The photograph between the china dogs. Your parents, young, stiff, slightly terrified, slightly proud. He's in that photograph in the way that photographs hold people, younger than you ever knew him, a stranger who is also entirely familiar. The ink-stained hands are not visible. It's just the upper part of him, his face and shoulders, his slightly formal expression for the photographer. He's also in the patchwork counterpane your mother made before you were born, in the penny-a-week insurance policy that paid for his funeral, in the laugh that your sisters have remembered and occasionally produce at unexpected moments. A loud, short, gone-fast laugh that emerges in Mary particularly and stops everyone in the room for just a second. In the hand mirror on your dresser, in the clocks. The clocks are going, the mirrors are uncovered. You can see yourself now in the mirror above the mantel, in the parlour that has been the same room through everything, through the sick man on the sofa, through Mrs. Price and Mrs. Hodgson preparing the body, through the mutes at the door and the hearse with its plumes, through the months of black and the condolence visits, and the 35 shillings that became 26 that became enough somehow, through careful management and the lodger's 7 shillings and the small daily work of surviving. You can see yourself in this room and the room, and you're both still here. The kettle begins to sing. You go back to the kitchen. You make the tea. The evening comes in the way November evenings come, early and certain, the grey sky outside the kitchen window going from light grey to dark grey to no grey at all, the gas lights on the main road coming on at their usual time, with their usual amber warmth, the street sounds shifting from the afternoon business of tradespeople and children to the evening sounds of people coming home. You set the table. Your mother comes down wearing her second-year mourning, the softer black, the crape reduced, the weepers shortened on the widow's cap. And she looks at you, and you look at her, and you both understand that today is today, and you have both carried it appropriately. She sits at the table. Ellen comes in from school with her plait slightly undone and her boots muddy, and a rock she found which she puts on the table. "For the collection," she says. Your mother looks at the rock. "We have a collection now." "I'm starting one." Your mother picks up the rock. It's a piece of grey London clay with a small fossil impression in it. A shell, perhaps, very faint. She turns it over in her hands, looks at it. "Yes," she says. "All right. We have a collection." Ellen sits down. Mary comes in shortly after, school satchel over one shoulder, already talking about something that happened at school, a dispute about something involving a girl named Florence, and a disputed ownership of a pencil case, the details of which wash over the kitchen and settle into the ordinary evening noise of a household with children in it. Supper, bread and dripping and cold mutton from yesterday, and the leftover soup, the seed cake from the tin. The lodger, Mr. Calloway, comes in at 7 and takes his place at the corner of the table and listens to the pencil case story with the expression of a man trying to follow plot, and asks a clarifying question about Florence that makes Mary explain from the beginning again more elaborately, and somewhere in the retelling your mother laughs. That quick, short laugh. Mary stops briefly, looks at her, then carries on with the story, building it up, because she knows now that the laugh will come if she gets the telling right. And she gets the telling right. The supper table, the gas lights, the rock on the edge of the table marking the beginning of a collection. Somewhere on the mantel in the front parlour the clock is ticking, and the mirror above it reflects the empty room, the firelight, the china dogs, the photograph between them. 2 things can be true. The loss is real. The sitting at the supper table is real, both entirely, simultaneously, without one negating the other. The clocks that were stopped are going. The mirrors that were covered show you what you are now, not what you were before. You are here. You are warm enough, fed enough. The house is the house, familiar under the strangeness that has settled into ordinary. The ordinary is what remains. This is what remains. Close your eyes. The Victorian mourning customs, the stopped clocks, the covered mirrors, the crape and the jet and the mutes at the door and the years of black, they were not arbitrary. They were not merely superstition. They were the visible architecture of loss, the way a community agreed to acknowledge that something had ended, and that the ending mattered, and that the people who remained needed time and space and the formal recognition of others to move through it. The clock stopped so that the household could stop, so that even the mechanism of ordinary time agreed, this moment deserves to be held. The mirrors covered so that the self could be briefly relieved of its own reflection, so that for a few days, in the midst of the most disorienting experience a family faces, you didn't have to look at yourself and know what you looked like. Both of those things are, in their different ways, humane, and the restarting of the clocks and the uncovering of the mirrors, those are humane too. Those say, you've held this, you've been still with it. Now time continues, and you in it, and the person in the mirror is still recognisably you. The town outside doesn't stop. It never stops. London in 1884 or 2024 or any year between and after, the city that contained everything, that has been containing everything for so long, just keeps going. Carts in the street, or cars, gas lamps, or electric ones, the particular smell of coal smoke giving way eventually to other smells, other fuels, the city's metabolism changing while the basic fact of it persists, people moving through their days, people losing people and covering mirrors and stopping clocks and then uncovering the mirrors and restarting the clocks and going on. The supper table, the rock on the edge of it, the clock on the mantel ticking. Let the day go. It's done its work. The grief is real and the management is real, and the black dress and the crape and the penny-a-week insurance policy are all real. Every bit of it happened. Every bit of it happens still in its variations, in the ways we mark loss and acknowledge it, and give it the physical space it needs before returning to time. Let it settle into the past, which is where it lives. Let the clock tick. Let the evening come in properly now, the dark outside the window complete, the house warm and lit, the kettle going cold on the range, the sounds of the street quieting toward the late hour. You've done what needed doing. You stopped the clocks, you covered the mirrors, you held the house in stillness for as long as stillness was needed. Then you freed the pendulums one by one and watched the minute hands begin to move, and you've been walking forward ever since. That's all it ever is. Holding still long enough to acknowledge what happened, then walking forward. The clock on the mantel reads 9:30 now, or thereabouts, or wherever the evening's got to while you've been sitting with this. In the cold of the small room in the house in November, in the quiet that the Victorian evening settles into after supper and before sleep, with the gas lights turned down low and the fire going to embers and the sounds of the street thinning out to the odd cart, the odd footstep, the distant bell from St. James's marking the hour. You're warm enough, you're fed enough, you're here. The patchwork counterpane on the narrow bed upstairs, the hairbrush, the bone-handled mirror, face up on the dresser, reflecting the ceiling. Tomorrow there will be the usual things, the usual getting up, the usual work and the usual street and the usual small negotiations of the day. The dress will be dark, but not as dark. The year of black is behind you now, but tonight, just this. The breathing of a house at rest, the clock ticking in the parlour, the slow closing of November around the city, around the street, around the window. Let your thoughts slow down. Let the list dissolve. Everything that tomorrow requires, everything still to be managed and arranged and figured out. Let it go soft around the edges the way lists go when sleep is coming for them. The Victorian mourning period, with all its severity and all its expense and all its crape and all its visible performance, was, underneath everything, just people trying to be adequate to loss, trying to give it the proper amount of space, trying to say to the dead and to each other, this mattered, you mattered, centuries will pass, The terraced houses will be renovated. The horsehair sofas will end up in antique shops or landfill. The gilt mantel clocks will become the kind of thing people inherit and don't know what to do with. Jay's mourning warehouse will close. It closes in 1894, in fact, the height of the mourning trade having passed. The Queen herself still in black, but fashion having moved on. The world's relationship to death beginning the long, slow shift toward the comparative reticence of the 20th century. The crape industry will decline. The mutes will disappear. The plumes on the hearses will give way eventually to cars and then to whatever comes after cars. But people will still die, and people will still stop briefly in the middle of ordinary time and hold the moment when someone is lost. They'll do it differently. The clocks won't be stopped, maybe. The mirrors won't be covered, probably. But some version of it persists. The lowered voice, the darkened room, the candle lit somewhere, some instinct toward making the inside world correspond to the inside experience, toward telling the house what happened, toward pausing before going on. That doesn't change. That is one of the things that doesn't change. The counterpane is warm, the room is dark. The sounds of the city are distant now, filtered and softened and the right kind of quiet. Not silence, which would be strange, but the particular soundscape of a city breathing at night, which is something you can sleep inside, which is actually exactly the right environment for it. Let the clock tick. It's ticking for you now. Marking your time, your evening, the slow approach of sleep. Not 2:31, not the fixed hands of stop time, just the moving hands of continuing time, ordinary time, the time you live in. You've earned this rest. The year of black is behind you. The mirrors show you yourself. The clocks say, it is now, it is now, it is now. Let it be now. Let sleep take you the way it took the girl in the terraced house in Marylebone, after the longest year of her life, after the crape and the jet and the mutes at the door and the grave at Kensal Green, and the months of managing and the supper table and the rock that started a collection. Let the specific weight of November settle over you. Let the warmth do what warmth does. Let your breathing slow to the rhythm that your body knows without being told. The fire is going down to embers. The gas lights on the main road have dimmed. The church bell somewhere in the distance marks the hour. You've been warm enough tonight, fed enough, here enough. That's more than enough. That's everything. Good night.